Good afternoon. My name is Alexandra Palmer. I'm the Nora E. Vaughan Senior Curator in Global Fashion and Textiles at the Royal Ontario Museum. I'm delighted you are joining us today for the Curator's Conversation, a digital program that explores themes and subjects from ROM collections alongside industry professionals. Today, I'd like to thank our partner, Fashion Art Toronto, for their support in presenting today's conversation. But before that, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the ROM sits on what has been the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabe Nation, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, since time immemorial to today. Thank you. So today we're discussing fashion and gender with Mick Carter of a Toronto label, L'Uomo Strano. So fashion in the museum, as in retail, is usually immediately categorized by binary systems, with gender being the first thing in the drop-down lists often. What I want to point out before we start is to underscore that gender in fashion is culturally constructed. It changes over time, and within any one culture can also be fluid historically, as this beautiful man's 18th century informal dressing gown, called a banyan often, shows. So this object, which is in the museum, is made out of a luxury silk that was designed for a woman's dress earlier in the century and was worn as a woman's dress. When that particular textile went out of fashion, it was still fashionable because it was an incredibly expensive textile and beautiful to be worn within the home by a man. So it's been transformed into this beautiful man's dressing gown by a tailor. So this is something that is neither masculine or feminine in terms of the museum cataloging system doesn't work so well. And this kind of problematizing of gender and fashion is what we're going to talk about today. So welcome, Mick. My guest today is Mick Carter, a Toronto creative invested in understanding how clothing can be used to embolden those on the slippages of cisgender heteronormativity and femphobia, primarily through ethnographic embodiment. The brand, L'Uomo Strano, experiments with gender non-conforming design that fuses social justice, futurity, abjection, and community through fashion. And we're going to discuss some of these things because it's rather a lot. Mick takes on a full wagon here. And at the end, we'll have time for your questions. So please submit them through the Q&A feature on your screen, please, not the chat. So how are you doing today, Mick?
I'm doing great. I'm doing absolutely phenomenal. Really excited about chatting with you. So thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for showing up and getting dressed, shall we say.
Always, always.
So first of all, I'd like to start with the name of your brand, L'Uomo Strano, which is Italian for strange man. And this came about through a negative experience, which I find quite interesting because you've really taken this on and actually made it your label. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. Should I wait for the slides to come up or just like jump into it?
Go, and the slides will magically appear.
Wow, you like manifested that. That's amazing. So yeah, the journey of L'Uomo Strano started at Central St. Martin's. So my 9 to 5 is teaching. I teach a grade 5-6 class in Little Portugal, and I love them. They're so exciting. But in between school years, I really explore fashion. And so I'd gone over to Central St. Martin's one summer, and I was taking a millinery class. You can see I was building that hat to look like an 80s afro, an angular 80s afro, and I loved it. It was really, really quite fun. But I guess at Central St. Martin's, I sort of understood it as being like this epicenter of creativity, and I wanted to show up as my most authentic self. But in this class, there was one woman who I guess had never seen a Black non-binary person before. And every morning, without fail, would just start laughing and call me L'Uomo Strano, which means the strange man or the strangest man. And I was very challenged by that experience as a teacher myself. That showing up in a space of pedagogy, which is supposed to be ultimately quite safe, was 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 confusing. And so, upon returning back to Toronto and really sort of wrestling with how I wanted to launch the brand and who I wanted to launch the brand for, this kind of meditation on what the strange man kind of means and looks like sort of inspired the next iteration of this fashion journey.
And part of that, I think, is your collection and your line is you take this on and you're interested in the abject. Can we have the next slide, please? And while you're creating beautiful, complicated fashions that move across gender and question these ideas, you're also interested in the things that are harder to deal with. So, which is the name of your brand to start with. But can you talk about why this is an important aspect of your collections and your thinking?
Absolutely. So the abject really sort of inspired my first collection at Fashion Art Toronto, and sort of speaks to the cast off. Usually it speaks to like the cast off, like the materials that leave our bodies, but from a sociology standpoint, it kind of speaks to the cast off sort of fringe members of society, those that have been denigrated and marginalized. And so with every collection, I really seek to like recenter a lens or recenter the eye on those that have been deemed abject within society, and really giving them the space to be able to explore their own beauty, communicate their own beauty, and communicate their own narratives. And I think that is like the one thing that Fashion Art Toronto, well, not the one thing, that is one of many things that Fashion Art Toronto really is able to do, right? They really give space for new designers to really communicate what they've experienced to be abject, and really allowing them to center changing that objection into beauty. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity that they give for all of these new kind of fashion startups to do that.
But that's also, I mean, the abject then becomes kind of meditative, praised, and beautiful as well, which is really
Absolutely
interesting in your collection. And your collection's coming up at Fashion Art Toronto in May.
It is.
And one of the designers who's showing there, and go buy your tickets, everyone. And you have rather a long, complicated artist statement, which I'm not going to read in entirety, but what I'm going to do is pull out some of the sort of key words that you're talking about, that you're trying to pull all these things together. So can we have the next slide, please? And so you talk about Afrofuturism, and can you explain this to our audience, please, or in your interpretation of that?
Yeah. Thank you for recentering it to my interpretation, because yeah, absolutely. Afrofuturism means so many different things to so many different people, but ultimately, to me, it means kind of taking a look at what Blackness can look like in the future, the possibility of Blackness. For so long, the narratives that have been told about Black people, whether it be in literature or in cinema, have been those that have revolved around pain, and particularly with the kind of police brutality that was happening a few years ago and still continues to happen. I really wanted to sort of imagine and be hopeful about what our future as a Black folk can kind of look like. And so I really, seek to do that in every collection and in this upcoming collection as well.
Thanks, Mick. So maybe I'll just rewind a bit. So we're talking here about keywords coming up in Mick's collection that's going to be at Fashion Art Toronto, but it's interesting. A lot of these things really come out of COVID, as we talked about earlier. And I think that what COVID has given us in some ways is quite positive in terms of what you've managed to do and place yourself. And so I just want that to kind of be in the mix here too. So the next one, please, is Josephine Baker.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think, once again, connected to COVID, when people started imagining 2021 and 2022, they were just like, oh my God, this year we're out of COVID. It's going to be incredible. And then there was like kind of this meme on Instagram that was just like, oh, 2022 is just 2020. TOO. And there was kind of this, the hope was sort of deflated. And so I really wanted to sort of explore that and took a look at sort of the optimism of the 1920s. And Josephine Baker definitely was one of the individuals that was quite central in that optimism, that play, and that fun. I mean, also at the same time, she was just a baddie, you know? She like was a spy. She was just like so great. She was so great. Yeah. So I definitely, I love Black femininity. I think it's so, I think it's so important, and so Josephine Baker as being one of the inspirations of this collection was something that I was really excited about.
Great. And another thing is the Himbo culture. Next slide, please, Erin.
Absolutely. So himbo aesthetics for sure is something that I guess is in a way connected to Josephine Baker, kind of the sensuality, the sexuality, the ostentatiousness, but like kind of embodying it in a way that also shows vulnerability. And so that sort of first started with kind of this see-through singlet, which I've worn a couple times with no complaints. Love this piece. And so I've just sort of continued kind of exploring like what this sort of himbo aesthetic can kind of look like, and what it can, and how it can move through spaces. Yeah.
Okay, and then this is all fused with JoJo's Bizarre Adventures. Next slide, thank you.
Absolutely. And so
You've got to explain, this is not something that maybe everyone knows about.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, in teaching grade 5 and grade 6 for quite some time, a lot of my students as of late have been obsessed with anime, like obsessed with it. And I've also definitely loved it for quite some time. And particularly this show has a lot of like queer coded storytelling and invokes aesthetics that are quite similar to himbo aesthetics. And so as I was watching this and getting the collection together, there was just so much synergy that was happening. And yeah, and so that's really kind of where that came from.
Okay, and then the bizarre ballroom.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was I love the ostentatious, I love the big, I love the unusual, I love the strange. It's built into the name of the brand, right? And so this past fall, I had the honor of teaching avant-garde fashion at X University, formerly Ryerson University. And the students and I really kind of spent some time taking a look at the bazaar, which is ultimately a space of innovation within the ballroom culture, where folks fuse.
Can you just go back and explain ballroom culture for the uninitiated, just quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of this mimetic space within kind of the Black community, first obviously in the United States, but it's definitely migrated over to Canada when it has a huge and vibrant ballroom community. And it's basically kind of these houses which ultimately kind of act as families, where you're coming together in these kind of competitive but also collaborative spaces where you're walking and posing for the win, ultimately. And it's so electric. It's such an electric space. And so one of the categories that one can compete in at these balls is the bazaar. And it's
AAR?
Yeah, well, I mean, it morphs back and forth sort of thing.
Bizarre as in peculiar, bizarre as in Harper's Bazaar. So
exactly.
Fashion is key here.
Absolutely, well said. Yeah, and it's just the intersection of those two things within an urban space, right? And I think that all of those things sort of fusing together is just so wonderful and so electric. And so yeah, that was definitely one of the inspirations. Here we have like a couple more photos of some garments that gesture towards the bazaar. I really like the one on the left done by Mark Banks, this incredible photographer here in this city, because it sort of takes the bazaar and it virtualizes it, right? So he's sort of like warped the fabric in post-production, and it really speaks to kind of a moment, the COVID moment, where so much of our interaction, so much of our play was made virtual. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's good to know that COVID is producing something creative, not only destructive. Rather sad. But let's talk about how your clothes are made, because you, as you said, you're a teacher and you have another life, but you weren't necessarily taught fashion design. You did your course at Central St. Martin's, and obviously wearing clothes, understanding clothes is central to that. But can you just talk about sort of how it goes, how you come about with these things?
Yeah, absolutely. So many of the designs are quite haptic in nature. So if we take a look at that look on the left, that was kind of almost like a 3D textile sculpture that I made during a Christmas vacation sort of thing. And it was definitely made from dead stock fabric. I love dead stock fabric. It like kind of lessens the pressure of perfection, but it also helps to save the planet, which, very exciting.
We need
I want the planet to be here for these students, because these students have great ideas and we want them to be able to like kind of bring them to fruition. So absolutely, on the left side we have kind of this dead stock fabric, but then we also have, like on the right, this upcycled moment. So that dress that I'm wearing is made completely out of napkins, like small sequin napkins, for Christmas or whatever, or the holidays rather, and just kind of stitched together meticulously to make this kind of flowing tunic. And so I do a
big party with all those napkins.
Absolutely.
It's fabulous.
Absolutely.
It's really great. I would never have known that. So the idea of sustainability and not necessarily using virgin textiles is important to your brand.
Absolutely. It's quite central. It's coded within kind of everything that I sort of do.
Mm-hmm. And you first showed it at FAT, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So on that.
Mm-hmm.
So on that very first slide, there was my brother rapping at my very first FAT show, and this was my last FAT show, which was a virtual fashion week. Vanya did this wild job of getting all of these really incredible locations around Toronto. This one was at Union Station, and it was called "I Hope This Email Finds You Well," and kind of spoke a little bit about kind of the emergence of these non-binary energies post-COVID. This was before Delta and Omicron, actually. They had another story. They had another mind, but there was an optimism and an ostentatiousness and obnoxiousness about taking up space, particularly in this kind of Union Station is this helm of capitalism. So it was just like really interesting to be able to kind of posit these models that are so fabulous in this space.
Mm-hmm. It looks wonderful, and thanks to all our photographers as well, I must say.
Absolutely, they smoked it.
And then you have, you have special clients that you work for too, right?
Absolutely. So this is the icon, the legend, Vivek Shreya, who is also a teacher out at the University of Calgary. but simultaneously like she writes plays, she writes music, she was on the socials, she's just like great, she does so many different
Can't
things.
hear
And
you,
so,
Mick.
oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, so I have worked with her for about 10 years, I would say, and it's just been so exciting to create sartorial moments with her. And I hope I get to continue to do so.
And can you describe what she's wearing?
So right in this moment, she's wearing it's a silhouette that I really love, and I revisit quite frequently. It's these big leg of mutton sleeve jackets with like a chevron sort of pattern. And it was for like a really iconic music video that she was doing last summer. And so yeah, that's
Right.
kind of what it was.
And you've done other your designs are obviously fabulous for performance, but this was an interesting thing that you did, again, coming out of COVID again. And actually worked this time, right?
For sure, for
Can you
sure.
tell us about this?
Absolutely. So this was in collaboration with the Toronto Dance Theatre, who their new artistic director, Andrew Tay, was like, listen, I'm going to partner every dancer in the company with an artist around the city, and we're going to see what happens. We're going to see what happens. And let me tell you, magic happened. It was absolutely phenomenal. So I got to collaborate with the iconic Devon Snow, and we sort of had this meditation on kind of what spirituality, Afro spirituality kind of looked like for us as we were growing up, and how we could transform that through a queer lens. And so this was almost probably my most explicit experience of abject aesthetics, being very intentional with that, kind of the cast off, and within the performance, Devin definitely like cast off tons of pieces to like make physical that act of abjection. So it was really fun.
I wish I'd seen that. That's really sounds fantastic. Maybe they can do reprise. And then very interestingly, I think, because I'm also an educator, you've taught the first Canadian course, and maybe one of the first courses anywhere, on non-binary design at University X, as you so cleverly said, under the long arm of Ben Barry, who was chair of the fashion department for a long time, has now gone to New York. For me, this is very interesting, because when I've studied fashion and design and every art history, whatever, well, because it was ages ago, we didn't even have any real discussions about gender. But historically, like, or I would have been taught that there was unisex fashion, right? The 60s, Pierre Cardin, Rudy Gernreich, who was a designer, like made these kind of statements about unisex. So it wasn't a differentiation, it was more androgynous, I guess.
Exactly.
But this kind of what you're doing and where we are today seems to, I don't know if it builds on that, but it's a more complex understanding, I think, of gender, rather than just saying, okay, there's just one. It's more complex. So I think it's interesting. So can you just talk a bit about how you'd even, I couldn't teach this class, but I'm glad you are. I should maybe take your class, because it's really interesting, both intellectually and as a maker. I think how you really question these constructs that are so embedded in everything we think. As I said, the drop-down list,
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that the great thing, or the thing that I found so exciting about teaching non-binary fashion design, was that the non-binary kind of aesthetic means so many different things to so many different people, right? Non-binary identity can mean that you are neither gender, that you move between genders, that you're outside of genders. So as a result, it kind of necessitated a certain amount of dialogue, right? Like that is part of like that at points people who do custom work have to engage in, but I think it's an added layer, right? Because you do have to sort of engage in these conversations about what does beauty look like? What does your gender look like today? And so this garment on the right was done by this incredible student. By the end of the course, each student had to take the course learning and then kind of do their own sort of little thesis project. And so this person was taking a look at the intersection of the visually impaired and non-binary fashion. And so within this piece, there's the emphasis of sound. I think there were bells on it. There was like an emphasis on texture and feel. So there's like a lot of different sort of ridges and elements that kind of really amplify that sort of that sensory element. And that was just like one example of where the students took it. And so I think that I learned a lot through teaching it. I learned a lot through watching these students explore and explode. Like, it was great. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic on all fronts, I think. And of course, as everyone knows, you know, wearing the wrong thing or wearing the wrong thing at the wrong time, everyone's experienced that. So, you know,
absolutely,
what it may be actually completely fine what you're wearing and someone wouldn't notice, but it's how you feel in it, and it's, you just want to rush home and take it off and put on something whatever else, but not that. So
absolutely,
these things, it's fashion so complicated because you know, it's what people see, it's how you see yourself, what you feel, all these things exactly that you've been talking about. And I think when we were talking before, you mentioned you didn't want to go in those H&M potato sacks when you were shopping in the wrong section of the fashion shops. I think you're way beyond the potato sacks.
Thank you.
So now this season, Fashion Art Toronto has also partnered with Inland, which is going to be at the show too, which I find really interesting, which is a Canadian platform for Canadian designers. And I think that's really fantastic. So go there. And now we're going to address, and thank you, Mick. Now we're going to address the Q&A.
Sounds good.
So let me go fishing in, oh gosh, I made it too big. Let me, sorry. Oh my. So someone said, it gives me great joy to know that you're a teacher. What a breath of fresh air. Can you speak about a little how you bring your ideas into the classroom? Nice question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the movements within kind of pedagogy right now, particularly in the TDSB, is like design thinking and the global competencies. And so that really pushes students to kind of collaborate, innovate, be entrepreneurial, that sort of thing. And so I think that sort of way of thinking is just so important in design as well. Whether it be non-binary design or textile design, I think that there's definitely a really interesting and rich intersection between those two worlds. I also sometimes feel that design is quite, it can be quite insular. Like it can be something that you're doing by yourself within your studio for large parts of the process. And teaching is really not that, right? Teaching is really like, yeah, it's all about those kids, you know, and really just ensuring that they're enjoying the curriculum as much as possible. We've been doing a lot of math as of late, so my kids are not loving the curriculum right now. But
well, you can count inches and measure.
I like that idea. I like that idea a lot. We're doing measurements soon, so that is exactly what we'll do.
Yeah, I mean, fashion is geometry, let's face it, too.
Absolutely. Geometry, measurement, there's a lot, yeah. Number sense, everything.
Deep thinking, yeah.
Exactly.
I like that. So can you tell us more about your development, about your upbringing that led you to this path, and were your parents and family supportive? This is a big question, and who were your influences? So I can chop that up if you want.
Yeah, no. So my parents, My parents initially were, I wouldn't say they weren't supportive. They were like first generation Bayesian folk, so from the island of Rihanna, Barbados, and so they really were quite vested in ensuring that their children like went to university, and so I did that. I did astrophysics, physics, and mathematics in university, and then went on to teach, and that was cute. That was a moment. And then I discovered the nightclub and was doing that quite frequently. And my parents were like, maybe do you need a hobby? And I was like, iconic. And so that's what really kind of inspired me to kind of start re-exploring my love of fashion. And so then my mom gave me my first sewing machine. You know, my parents recently came to a show and were selling merch. It was just really cute to see my dad like doing it. It was great. Yeah, so they're
Fantastic.
super supportive now.
That's really nice. Do you think this is tricky? Do you think there's a specific reason why fashion has been classified into men and women as opposed to ancient times? For example, when men used to wear skirts and dresses. I could do a whole class on this, but get a quick take.
My hot take on that? Yeah, I feel like I think there's this really incredible thinker, Alok Menon, who is a poet and works a lot with the Queer Eye guys. And what they say is that the non-binary identity shows those that are within the binary that the freedom is possible, and that can at times be scary for folks that have been really invested in upholding the binary. And so I think that that's a really interesting idea.
Can you just say the name of the author again for people?
Yeah, like Alok, A-L-O-K, and then Menon, M-E-N-O-N.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Okay, a lovely question. If you could dress anyone in the world, who would it be?
Oh my goodness, it changes all the time, but right now, you. I want to dress
Oh, yay. All right, great question. Thank you, whoever anonymous attendee. Another question, are there any rules? It's so refreshing, this feels beyond rules or boundaries, but I bet there are rules too.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think as I create this upcoming collection, I'm kind of in the throes of it. The rule that I'm sort of oscillating around and really keeping at the forefront of my mind is that I don't want to make anything that I've seen before, right? Like I love references. I love synthesizing those references into syncretic forms, but I think the rule is to ensure that it's something that's quite novel and innovative to me, and that's something that I definitely push my students to kind of do as well, and also that it's useful, right? Like whether that be clothing that's useful for stylists to really kind of push the narratives forward of what fashion can look like, particularly in a Toronto sense. I've had the honor of working with so many really incredible and intelligent and creative stylists who've really done great work. So yeah, I just want to make sure that the pieces are useful and innovative.
Fantastic. How does color influence your design? And I'm not sure.
Like race or like?
It doesn't say specifically, but I take it, I'd answer it as you wish to.
Okay, yeah, like I would say that in terms of race, because Afrofuturism is so built into the codes of the brand, race is always super important, right? Like really just that imagination, that Black imagination, and moving that into sartorial spaces. And then just in terms of like color, like, I don't know, like red, blue, whatever. I think, I don't know, I really think joy is quite important, right? And so I may start a collection and be like, this collection is going to be Black, white, navy, and beige, and then this happens, you know. Like it's just I'm Big Bird ultimately right now. So and so it's something it's something that is also quite coded into my DNA. And I think that that's partially related to like Caribana and Barbados, where like color is celebratory, you know, and it references like some of our very important kind of festivals. So I think that that's probably ancestral in that sort of way. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Do you think do you think you need to change in your thinking to create genderless fashion pieces? And that's a rather complicated question.
I think that's I think it's an interesting question. I think we had talked about this a little bit before, that when I had started out, this kind of notion of genderless fashion was something that was really like taking off. H&M had it, Zara had it, and it was very kind of degendered clothing, right? As you had noted, potato sacks and navy and beige. And I'm like, that's not a vibe. It's not a vibe for me. And so at that point, I was just like, no more genderless, gender more. I was like, Mick, you have cracked the code. You have cracked the code. This is exactly what you're going to do. That was like in my early 20s. And then I realized that like gender more clothing is ultimately like non-binary fashion, right? So yeah, probably yeah. I'm going to lean more into the gender more and less.
I think we need to stop saying genderless and saying gender more. I like that.
Let's start it.
Let's go. Okay, I've gone on board. Question, who are your sewers and pattern makers? Do you work mostly by draping?
Yeah, really good question. So the pieces that I make mostly by draping, to be quite honest. This year, I'm so grateful and so excited about working with Pigeons and Thread, it's not a startup because it's been going for a while, but it's like a company that was built, a female-led company that was built after these girls women had graduated from Ryerson. And so it's like literally just north of my day job school. So at Ossington and DuPont, so I'm working with them. I have a phenomenal intern named Anthony Mancini, just shouting them out, a non-binary icon. And then I also work with this really phenomenal man out in Mississauga named Larry Richards. He's also West Indian and a little bit older. So I love that intergenerational kind of collaboration. I think it's just so rich and needs to be done more.
I'm going to just ask you to explain a little bit about you're moving towards actually making a line, making something that's available online for people to buy. So can you just give people a little heads up on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So many of the pieces as of like prior to this have been kind of like these haptic sculptures, larger than life, and really great for shoots, but not necessarily great for like, you know, going to Food Basics or wherever you buy your produce, you know? And so it's definitely been something I've been focusing on. I had the honor of going through the Social Venture Zone, which is this incredible entrepreneurial space at X University, run by Sarah Burgell and Alex Gill. And then I had this phenomenal like mentor named Anne Pringle, who was like, Mick, get it together. We love the pieces, but ultimately we need something that folks can wear, you know, to the office. And it still needs to be coded in kind of in what L'Uomo Strano stands for, but it can't have a 4-foot train behind it. It just can't do it. And so
it has to be accessible in terms of price point and online. Get it soon, get it now.
Exactly. So it's been a challenge. So I think with this iteration, I'll be doing that mostly with kind of the himbo aesthetics. Like there'll be a number of kind of variations of that just in time for Pride. And then there'll be kind of more office-worthy offerings. But I'm working with a couple of stylists for the Junos, and I'm hoping to get a couple of pieces kind of for those moments as well.
That's actually more challenging, I think, that going in that, because that's really new ground.
Absolutely. It's distilling down the creativity into something that
really going out there in terms of an audience. And
exactly.
Very interesting.
Exactly.
Question, did you find Vanya and fat, or did she find you? And do you have relations with other designers from the shows?
Really great question. Vanya, icon. So I met, I think my very first year, didn't know much about Vanya, to be quite honest. Just applied and they were like, okay, cool, whatever. Um, let's do it. And then since then, she is definitely championed the brand, like and the collections every step of the way. Um, I yeah, I don't think I know Strano would not be what Strano is without her, and so I'm forever grateful. So that's what I would say about Vanya. And simultaneously, as I had noted earlier, like I just think that she extends that to so many of the designers, really giving them a space to kind of communicate their understanding of fashion and really elevating it with her team. So yeah, Fashion Art Toronto is the greatest. So that would be one thing. And then interacting with other designers, yeah, absolutely. So they have a launch parties, they have closing parties, so we get to really kind of interact there. She was recently on the
sorry, Nick, we're running out of time. I just want to get in two more questions.
Yep.
And one is actually from my student who says, have you often considered in fashion, does size inclusivity play a role in your designs at all? And this is an issue that I've talked about in my class.
Absolutely. Really, really great question. Yeah, so I think I love an elasticized waist, which I know is not great, like it's taboo, but I do love an elasticized waist. But I do find that because a lot of my pieces kind of sit on the oversized. They kind of fit different bodies in different ways, but all of them kind of tend to be quite fabulous. And so, yes, size inclusivity is super, super important. And I think that that's one of the benefits of draping, right? Like you can really kind of see how it interacts with various bodies.
Yeah, true. Very true. And I think last question, which is nice. Is there anything special about being in Toronto right now in terms of your designs or thinking? I mean, we have that, but.
Yes. We have that. Which I think is, yeah, definitely at the one of the vanguards within this community. I think we also just have, a lot of diversity, and I think not just in terms of racial diversity or gender diversity, but just in terms of the way that people think about fashion and what they bring onto the runway. And I think that the more that we kind of equip the next generation of designer with spaces and with funding to be able to kind of continue their brands and to push, to enable them to evolve their brand, then I think that we're in for a wild ride. I really do think we are. So I'm very excited. So, and yeah,